Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today, I'm pleased to present you with a very special installment in my continuing series of Community Spotlight videos, in which I had the opportunity to sit down and interview the winner of the 2015 Australian National Championship, Brendon Byrnes. Specifically, we discuss how he got involved in the game, his competitive background and gaming history, his tournament preparation, and of course, a little bit about his deck composition. We talk about the entire 2015 championship experience as a whole, and throughout the interview, he provides a wealth of knowledge, advice, and wisdom regarding both the entire event and the concept of competitive gaming as a whole. So, if you enjoyed this video, remember to hit the like button, ensure you're subscribed, and you're encouraged to share, because as always, the more engagement this content receives, the more viewers and listeners are reached, and ever the broader you help us to grow our Conquest community. But with our introduction aside, I'm honored to bring you an interview with our 2015 Australian National Champion. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but before we cut straight to the heart of this interview, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know just a little bit about how you're involved in the Conquest community.
So my name's Brendon Byrnes. I was the Australian National Champion on September 6th, I believe. I'm a little bit involved on the Card Game DB forums under the handle BrebDab. I'm starting to get more active now, and I'm a massive part of the Australian meta as a whole, but most particularly the Victorian and Melbourne metas.
Well, congratulations on your recent championship victory. It's absolutely stellar that you were able to pull that off. The Australian player base happens to be woefully underrepresented online, so it's fantastic to hear that you're an active, probably integral part in your local meta. But taking a look at kind of your humble beginnings, what was it exactly that got you started in gaming in the first place?
So, like most people, I got into card gaming through Magic the Gathering.
I've never heard of that game. Tell me more.
I started playing Magic back in somewhere in the 2000s, well before even the modern format was released. I ended up quitting that and taking a break for some time out of anything because I didn't like Warhammer 40k 4th edition, which I was also playing.
Okay.
I came back with Warhammer 40k 5th edition, and being at my friendly local game store, I saw Game of Thrones. I enjoyed Game of Thrones a lot. I started to get quite competitive about it because I met with great success at my local store championship. I managed to come just behind and nearly beat who I rate as the best player in Australia.
Wow.
So I started to get more competitive about it and keep nipping at his heels. And unfortunately, the Game of Thrones that same year, I ended up taking regionals for it. That same year, they announced the reboot. So that killed Game of Thrones in Australia. Completely killed it.
Right.
So we're all waiting for the reboot. Luckily for me, Conquest came along at that point in time, several months after the announcement. It took us quite a long time to get it here in Australia. I think it was October or November before we even saw it. But as a 40k player, I immediately translated across to Conquest as a shot because a lot of my 40k friends wanted to play it. And then I started playing Conquest competitively. I got some top 4s and top 2s at regionals and managed to win nationals somehow.
Well, spectacularly well done once again. It sounds like you're steeped in the 40k universe, having played the tabletop game at some length. I suppose back in the day, once you had the minis, what faction did you collect?
So went back to 40k recently. Went back in third edition, I used to play Eldar.
Okay.
Now I'm mainly playing Space Marines and Imperial Guard.
Well, fantastic. I think every time I play a game of Conquest or record an interview or spectate a game, it's a very dangerous, slippery slope pushing me ever closer to buying some miniatures again, and then it's a lot of time and a lot of money invested in that. But I suppose, what is it that keeps you faithful to Conquest? Certainly you've got that Magic the Gathering background, you've got the Game of Thrones background, so it's a company that you know, has proven itself to you. But why stick with Conquest, despite the 40k appeal?
So I really like Conquest as a game set. I think it's close enough to Magic the Gathering and other variant card games that it's really easy to pick up for everyone that's got that background.
Sure.
But the differences are substantial with multi-platform battles. So with all the planets, instead of fighting 1v1, how you do in Magic, etc., meeting on 5 different playing fields adds a completely new dimension to the game.
Definitely.
Adding in warlords, which completely change the game wherever they're played, and just the overall balance of the game, which, if you ignore certain cards, is actually pretty good. It seems fantastic.
Right, and Conquest is just kind of, starting off. We've just seen the release of the first full cycle. I think the Great Devourer is finally shipping out to stores, so balance certainly seems like it's in a pretty decent place. I don't have much of a history playing, say, Magic the Gathering or something like that competitively, but it seems to me like we've got a reasonable number of top-tier Warlord contenders, and I imagine things will hopefully only get better in time. But anything else in particular really shine or sparkle as just hallmarks of what make Conquest into such a stellar game?
For me, it's a lot about the community. It's the people that play the game. There's a lot of very intelligent people that play the game both locally and internationally, and being able to play against those people is fantastic. I'm really hoping to actually get to play a game against Davis Kingsley when I go to Worlds.
Sure.
Hopefully he'll be there. But as a whole, for me, a lot of it is that, my friends and local community are really excited about the game, and that drives me to be really excited about the game as well.
Well, that's great to hear. Certainly you and I are worlds apart, but this game has brought us together, so if there's nothing else that it's done, it has at least done that. And
it's one of the great things about the internet as a whole is that and international level gaming is that it does bring people from completely different countries that would otherwise never meet and never talk together.
Absolutely. Back when I used to do a podcast for Lord of the Rings, I actually had a fan who became a co-host, and he went on a ridiculous world tour from Australia, and part of that happened to involve visiting tiny little Yakima, Washington, and meeting up with me to play a few card games. So the internet is an amazing thing, and this game is a fantastic, icebreaker and friendship builder. So I suppose you happen to mention earlier, we cannot ignore the facts as they are. You've won the 2015 Australian National Championship. You also happen to mention that you've had an impeccably strong regional championship showing, lots of top 4s, lots of top 2s. I suppose, what exactly are some of your personal strengths as a competitive player? Like, what sets someone like you apart from someone more casual who just dabbles in card games?
It's really hard to say what sets competitive players above casual players except for time investment. I spend a lot of time both playing the game and playtesting every card that goes into my deck, as well as looking at curves, shields, hammers, everything that needs to go in a good deck shape. But a lot of the other reasons that really good competitive players shine is that they're able to put losses behind them.
Sure.
Casual players can struggle to do that. Well, in my experience, casual players can struggle to put losses or bad plays behind them and get back into the game.
Yeah, they can kind of struggle to see them as like learning experiences. They maybe allow themselves to get discouraged and give up.
Well, I played a couple of games last night. They were the first games I'd managed to play since winning the Nationals. And I was playing with a couple of new warlords that I only played a little bit. And I got destroyed by a friend of mine. But the important part was that everyone needs to recognize that you need to lose games to win games. You need to learn what you don't do so you never do it again.
Right. I suppose, figure out what your weaknesses are so that you're not just focusing on your strengths all the time. I know in a tournament context, a lot of people will, when they're prepping for a tournament or something like that, they won't just give up or concede games. They'll try to play back from a losing standpoint just to practice being at a disadvantage, as opposed to just having a lot of practice in when your deck is doing everything it normally intends to.
Not just that, but if you keep playing through when you play testing, you will inevitably learn whether you could have fought back from that position, which you'll never know until you try.
Right.
You'll learn whether you could have won that game. Even if you don't play through it, you'll never learn whether you could have fought back or not. But just as much, you'll learn the plays that your playtesting is designed to teach you. So you'll learn the Planum Siren combo. You'll learn whether Searing Brand is a good play at a certain period of time. You'll learn whether using a drop pod to put a unit at a planet that doesn't actually have a fight is worth doing. All that stuff that you need to know whether it's good for your deck shape or not. And if you don't keep playing the games, you won't learn those things.
Well, most definitely. And I suppose just in taking a look at your most recent tournament experience, Packmaster Kith happened to be the warlord that you'd chosen to pilot. You were very kind in humoring me and not diving in depth about our very, very well represented Dark Eldar warlord, but I suppose before we talk about your specific tournament experience, what are just some overall strategies you've come across for playing Conquest, like some general rules of thumb or just sound pieces of advice that allow you to be such a strong competitive player?
One of the important things that I feel is that you need to recognize how your playstyle affects what warlord choices you should make. You always need to be conscious of what warlords are viable in a meta or have strong enough cards to be competitive, but you also need to play something that fits your playstyle. The common categories are aggro, choke, tempo, and control. Most of the warlords fit into these. Some of them skirt the lines, but most of them fit into one of those categories. You need to work out which one of those fits you the best and play within that playstyle. As a player myself, I play tempo and control. That's what suits me. I feel most powerful when I'm playing two decks that have answers. I have all the cards in my hand. I'm setting the tempo. I'm setting the pace. I have all the answers. The other one is that you've got to be willing to be aggressive. Remaining conservative never wins you a game.
Sure, I suppose if you're always trying to ensure that you don't lose, you might actually miss an opportunity to win just because you're so, focused on being purely reactionary.
Being conservative is really good. You maintain board presence, you maintain resources, you maintain cards. It gives you the best chance to get consistency. But when you need to be able to go aggressive and finish out that game, and you need to recognize the time to become aggressive. So one of the big things for me for strategy is filtering. Filtering is a term that I use and a lot of people use to get through your deck faster.
Sure.
A great example of those cards for me, and this is a much maligned card, is Superiority. A lot of people have very strong opinions on whether Superiority is a good card, a bad card, a not great card, whether it should be played, shouldn't be played. For me, superiority is fantastic because if you use superiority, not only is it denial, your opponent doesn't get the cards resources they probably would have gotten, but if you can get a card or even 2 cards out of it, you're suddenly, if you're running 3 superiorities, you're playing a 57 card deck. In something like Kith, where you're looking for Chimeradin, actively looking for Chimeradin virtually every game, every matchup, you've suddenly increased your chances to find Chimeradin. Another example is Fortel. It pluses the card when you use it. So finding those filter cards is fantastic. And quite often you can also use a card like Superiority the same way Eldrath or Ragnar would use their command win to get a command win over your opposing warlord. Looking at your planetary battle abilities. Some of the great combos come from planetary battle abilities. One of the best plays I've seen as Kith is to use the Planum battle ability, which is move target unit,
right,
to remove your Siren. You play Siren at something like Planet 1 or somewhere where your opponent needs to go, then trigger Planum and move Siren to where you actually need it.
Certainly. And along those same lines, there have been innumerable occasions when I've seen someone use Farron to spectacular effect, where an opposing unit happens to be really nasty somewhere along the board, and then once you win a battle at that planet, whether you just send your warlord there directly, or maybe you foresight your warlord there, or Black Manes hunt your warlord there, however you end up winning a planet there, if you suddenly rout one of your opponent's units unexpectedly, it can just cause such enormous power shifts where maybe you're not saving one of your own units from ending up in your headquarters only to be returned to play exhausted, but when you're forcing your opponent to do that, it's just every little drop of additional value you can squeeze out of your cards and prevent your opponent from gaining. It just seems like it can make such a monumental effect as to the outcome of a game.
Oh yeah, Farron is a fantastic effect because it doesn't have any conditions on what you're out except for non-warlord.
Right.
Especially some of the most brutal games that I've ever seen had Farron as one of the opening 2 planets. And the priority player with initiative was able to win Farron and use that to just completely decimate their opponent's command presence, and thus lock in a massive, massive commander advantage. It also is fantastic for getting rid of as you said, getting rid of that dangerous unit down the line, much the same way you'd use any kind of rout effect, but you don't need to use the card from hand to do it.
Sure. And I suppose just another thing that kind of sticks out to me is maybe newer players might overvalue, say, outright destroying a unit, whereas maybe using something like a Sicarius is Chosen to pull a unit away from a battle, even though you're not actually destroying it, it might make all the difference in the world. Like a Space Wolves Predator could prevent an entire army worth of units from being sent to the game deciding planet. So just really, like you mentioned before, making sure you understand each and every card and just how to use it in each and every situation. Just when I started this channel myself, a lot of people were kind of confused as to why I really focused on covering the core cards, and I wanted to do that not only to teach myself, but to really just, scour each and every corner case situational use for each and every card, just to try and have every conceivable benefit or use for any unit or any card just somewhere floating in my mind, just so that throughout the course of a very dynamic game like Conquest, where the planets are always different, the layout is always different, you try to consider as many possibilities as you can.
Well, that's a big part of playtesting. Just playing all those games with all your cards, you learn every viable move for those cards and every viable combination of those cards. And testing the core is especially important because it's not part of rotation.
Right.
So it will be part of our game for as long as the game exists. So knowing exactly what all the core warlords do, all the core cards do, and considering combinations, so you can instantly look at new cards and say, well, that pairs really well with that, is extremely, extremely important.
Sure. I mean, it certainly helps build an absolutely rock-solid foundation that, just like you said, you can always rely on no matter what the rest of the card pool looks like. But before we break into your experience at Nationals and kind of touch on some of the highlights, the lowlights, the best plays, and some of the tragically worst plays you witnessed, any overall advice for players really looking to hone their strategy?
So I feel like I'm reiterating this, but lots and lots of practice is the best way that you can get even close to get better. But just as much, you need to find good players. Finding good players is important, but just as much you need to find players that are just as good or slightly worse than yourself. Just as having a good player to chase makes you better because you've got someone to hunt. Having someone nipping at your heels is just as pressuring. So if you've got both, you'll get a lot better as a competitive player.
Right. Some kind of like stress, something beneficial, something to aspire to, whether it's not getting your ass kicked or doing the ass kicking yourself.
Yeah, well, it's really good if you've got that with friends as well, because then there's not a lot of pressure, but you know they're constantly getting better, and thus to be the top dog, you've got to keep increasing your own strategies. You've got to keep getting better.
Definitely. Well, I suppose just moving things right along, you happen to have the recent championship experience. What exactly was it like at the Australian Nationals? So what was the turnout? What kind of warlords did you see? Kind of walk us through some of the highlights of the tournament.
So the Australian Nationals was in Melbourne, which was really good for me because it's less than an hour's drive from my home. We held it at a off-store venue. We saw, I believe it was 31, but all I know it was 30 plus, with a lot of different decks. There was, I think, every warlord was represented in some fashion, even to the point where I saw someone playing Strachan, which I've got to take my hat off to them for.
Sure.
We also saw a really large amount of Nasdreg, which surprised me. I think there was roughly 6 or 7 Nasdreg players.
Wow.
And one of them even got to cut, which was amazing. I really like seeing Nasdreg do well. Orcs haven't had a lot of success. While Nasdreg is beating on the door of T1, he's not quite there. He's just not efficient enough. He doesn't hide enough of his play.
Right.
But we also saw a lot of chaos. It was a very anti-Kith meta. Everyone knew Kith was coming. Kith was very, very prevalent through our regional season, especially because after Store Champ season, the Australian meta shifted to an Eldorath meta. So a lot of the top, I think, out of our 5 regional championships, only one wasn't won by Kith.
Well, I mean, it definitely makes sense that the player base would try to respond to that, although judging from your performance in the tournament, it seems as though they weren't entirely successful.
Apparently not. I'm still really pleased to have gotten through despite some bad matchups that I got. So we did see all our regional buys represented, which was really good. Obviously, with the Fantasy Flight change to their buy system, if you already had a buy and won at regionals, the buy got passed down. We did see every single person with a buy there, so we had 5 buys in our first round, including myself, which is really heartening for the game because that means that a lot of people travelled upwards and over 8 hours to be down here.
Wow.
And play in our nationals.
Well, that's
yeah, Australia's a lot bigger than people think it is.
Sure. That's some pretty serious commitment, though. That's excellent to see.
Yeah. I'm really stoked for the game in Australia at the moment. We've got a lot of really good players. and we've got a lot of people trying a lot of different things. I saw Shadow Sun, I saw Nazdrag, lots of Zarathur, a lot of Kugath. Justifiably, Kugath has a really good matchup against Kith, and Eldrath has been completely drummed out of our meta for the most part. But I also saw lots of Kato, Ragnar. There was a lone Eldrath player, and he did amazingly.
Well,
I cannot say enough how well he played to beat Chimera Dens repeatedly.
I mean, that just sounds absolutely spectacular, and it sounds like, as cliche as it is to say it, it sounds like down under, things are extraordinarily diverse, so it's nice to see a broader meta than exists in, it seems like in so many different national championships, it's X number of players were Kato, and another number were Ragnar, and so many were Kith, and then Eldorath, and then that's about the extent of the representation. But just seeing so much diversity is fantastic, and there's kind of a lot on the line, too, at a national championship. It's not just some local store event, especially if people are traveling half as long as you were saying, something like 8 hours. You've got to be pretty confident in your Nazdrag or Shadow Sun deck if, you happen to make a commitment like that. But I suppose before we touch on some of your specific matches that you played and what some of the highs and lows of your personal tournament experience were, what are some of those differences maybe between Australia and the rest of the globe or the online meta? Like, are there big significant differences?
There's not as many big significant differences as it seems, unfortunately, in some cases. There's still X amount of Kith, X amount of Ragnar, X amount of Eldorath, not so much Eldorath anymore. But the big difference is in cards that we're using. So because of playtesting with each other, we form similar views on similar cards.
Right.
One of them, example, again, superiority. Superiority is very highly rated in Australia. But we also form very good views on where you should pair your ally with.
Okay.
That will pair your warlord with. So that was actually very surprising to me because I took Kith Eldar. I feel that Kith Eldar is the best combination. You miss out on the Warp Storm, but you get Warlock Destructor, and Warlock Destructor is almost necessary to get out of Cacophonic Choir, which is seeing more and more play. There was a lot of Kith Chaos, including some very highly rated players taking Kith Chaos, assuming it to be a good meta call against Kith Eldar.
Sure.
Unfortunately, that didn't pan out for them. Most of them didn't make cut, or they got knocked out early in cut. But because they don't have the tools to get out of the Kith Eldar choke anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They're losing the superiority. Again, if people are playing superiority, you almost need to play superiority yourself, otherwise you'll lose to it.
Well, it can definitely be a very powerful command shift.
Yes, it's tempo, it's denial, it finds you, it filters. But the big difference is that we have a lot of people that are just trying different things. So our South Australian regionals winner was a Zarathur Big Demons deck. And he brought that deck again on to nationals. So seeing that was really cool. We've almost completely abandoned Eldorath. Eldorath is down to, we saw one at nationals. I think there's really only a couple of people still flying the flag of Eldorath just because of how many Kith players we do have in Australia.
Right.
Kith is very much the popular warlord. We don't see a lot of Kato, but we do see a lot of Ragnar. It's that we still see all the same warlords that the rest of the world sees. We just have different focuses.
Yeah. Well, I suppose offhand, do you happen to know what kind of turnout regional championships happen to have, like an approximate ballpark of how many players are showing?
So there was a very big difference between the regional numbers in Australia. Some of them got really high numbers, high enough that they competed with the rest of the world. Some of them with the low turnouts that everyone sees and kind of dismisses as a very low-key tournament. For the most part, they got anywhere between 15 and 25,
Wow.
which for a first year card game seems very reasonable to me.
Sure. And for some decks, like, the Zarather Elite Demons type and things like that, it's nice to see a significant number of games won so that chance is playing less of a factor.
Yeah, seeing decks like that win especially at a 6, 7, 8 round event is fantastic because it means that there's something in that deck that the rest of the games they play just couldn't deal with, and it has to be consistent enough that it keeps popping that on the table.
Well, I suppose it sounds like there's some significant diversity differences comparing Australia to the rest of the world or the online community. Certainly our card pool isn't tremendous, but as more expansions come out, as the Great Devourer finally hits store shelves, as the Planetfall cycle slowly starts to trickle out into retail availability, do you picture Australia kind of becoming more homogenous with the rest of the world or staying different?
So I think that Australia will become quite different despite the fact that the internet creates a global meta. We have a different focus on our cards because there's a lot of people playing different things. We can't always play the optimal build. We have to build for, as always, you have to build for the meta you play in.
Right.
I expect to see a lot of people, because I expect to see a lot of people playing certain warlords. There's a lot of interest in Barzul. There's a lot of interest in the new Gene Stealer, Subject, Theta, whatever the numbers are.
Right. You're close.
I remember parts of the name. There's a lot of interest in the new Gene Stealer. There's a lot of interest in the new Black Templar Chaplain. I expect to see us quite diverge from the rest of the meta just because our players play the decks that interest them as opposed to what's good.
Huh. Do you think that that's almost just a function of isolation, or is it just you have, like, what makes the Australian community so kind of uniquely its own thing?
Well, it's very hard to say it's isolation because despite how far we are, the internet creates a meta that everyone shares.
Sure.
Everyone shares the information, everyone shares ideas. So on the internet, people tend to form a very similar idea of what is good and what is not.
Right.
But as a player base and as a community, we've tried to encourage people to play what they want to play as opposed to what they think they need to play. And that creates a community where people are trying new things, they're playing new warlords, and they're looking at the warlords that they think would be a lot of fun and just turning up with those.
Well, I mean, it's kind of heartening, just like you mentioned earlier, that having a fun first mindset, it just seems very refreshing. And as someone who himself would create spreadsheets to optimize character marriages in role-playing games and things like that, it's very nice to see some people that are really valuing entertainment above, power gaming.
Well, at its core, Conquest is a card game we all play to have fun. There is a competitive side, and a lot of people get enjoyment, myself included, get enjoyment out of the competitive side to the game and thus play the stronger decks. But at the core of Conquest, we're all meant to have fun. And so making sure that people have fun when they play games keeps the community strong, gets new players into it. And then you see a lot of diversity because everyone's trying new things, and you've just got so many people trying new things that there's virtually no way to call it a cohesive meta anymore.
Well, definitely. I suppose changing track ever so slightly and just focusing more on your recent championship, what were some of your personal experiences? Like, what are some of the best memories, some of maybe the worst memories you have coming from the Australian Nationals? Like, what was that experience like for you?
So obviously, as the winner, the experience was amazing.
Right.
It was really good to get to the top tables. On specific notes for certain things, though, I got to play against a gentleman from the Card Game DB forum, Syntax Lost,
Okay.
who came down from Sydney, and playing against him and talking to him through the rest of the day was fantastic. I have a lot of respect for his ability to play the game and make a very bold call on a wall that he hadn't played a lot but thought was a good meta call.
Mm-hmm.
And so playing against him, beating him, but then talking to him through the rest of the day was fantastic. Something that was a little bit more disheartening was I managed to lose one of the very rare games I lose against Eldorath with Kith. So by 3 rounds in, I was X1.
Well, I suppose what was it that went wrong? Just because normally that is a match players tend to struggle with, to maybe give a little bit of advice and encouragement to those struggling Eldorath players. How was your opponent able to ultimately best Kith?
So he was able to best Kith despite the fact I played Chimera Den on turn 1, which was massive. He managed to stay completely on top of my Chimeras, so I never managed to achieve the critical mass that turns Kith into such a danger. And he was able to pressure early planets, so I had to keep committing all the Chimeras I had to stopping him from winning the game. He was playing Eldorath Tau, which with ion rifles and tense negotiations, as well as the space to run something a little bit out of the box in Fortal, there was a lot of tech choices that I didn't know about,
right.
And thus I ran straight into an example of one of the worst plays for me in that was that I'm committed to a Clavex play. So I removed the Warlock Destructor, Clavexed it, then I got gifted. So he brought the Warlock Destructor back.
Right.
So with the Chimeras back onto planet, I ended up winning the fight, but I ended up having to invest a lot into it.
Sure.
So I could get the route trigger. Again, going back to Farron, the route trigger is massive. He had a Starbanes with an iron rifle, but I walked straight into the Fortal, and without all those resources and all those cards I invested in, so I was never able to fight my way back into that game.
Right. Well, apart from your rough start with the tournament, what were some of your other games like? What were some of those high points? Because, typically tournament champions don't lose too many games.
So that was the only game I lost for the day. I ended up going 8-1. Some of the high points was that I got to get a rematch against one of the players that, Cal Ashton, who won 3 of our regionals and also pipped me for 2 of them.
Wow.
So we managed to get our rematch in the top 4, and winning that was almost the high point of the day for me. Almost better than winning the final.
I'll say. That sounds like the grudge match of the century.
Yeah, well, now our record's now it's 2-2, so I'm coming for you, Cal. I'm coming for you. But yeah, the match was fantastic. It wasn't the epic match that I'd hoped for going into it, but winning it was vindication. It was proof that I was the competent player I thought I was at the time. One of the best moments for me, referring back to Syntax, was the time before the final after my match with Cal. I had a good 15-20 minutes before the other game resolved, and Joel spent the entire time talking me down because I was that nervous, and was just constantly telling me it's just another game, it's just another game. So for anyone that's playing competitively, I cannot stress enough, it is just another game. There's a lot on the line, but if you can ignore that and just play your game, if you win, you win, you lose, you'll do a lot better.
Well, definitely. Trying to block out all sorts of external distractions and everything else. Certainly it's hard not to succumb to all the pressure and this arbitrary self-imposed nervousness and anxiety and all sorts of stuff like that. I'll fully admit that's definitely something I struggle with myself, so it's just fantastic that you were able to overcome that, and good on your friend for, helping you to get your mind back in the zone.
Yeah, no, I was really appreciative of that, and it enabled me to go into the final with the mindset that it was just another game, and obviously that turned out really well for me. I played Eli, the Eldrath player that I'd already lost to in the final again, and this time with the much longer win condition on planets, it was the rare combination that suggests that you can't win until at least 6.
Right.
I was able to achieve critical Chimera Swarm, and once I found Den, I was just able to pressure him until he eventually offered the handshake.
Well, I mean, spectacularly well done. It's not everybody that can win a national championship, so a huge congratulations to you. I suppose the obvious question now is what's next for you? Are you intending to be part of our upcoming World Championship?
So the prize pack for Australian Nationals included a ride to Worlds, which I'm ecstatic about. So it's they're paying for all my flights, and thank you, if anyone from Fantasy Flight or GGD is listening to this, thank you a million times for this. A complete flight package and accommodation to go to Worlds.
That's incredible.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm incredibly happy. So yes, I'm intending to go to Worlds, and hopefully I can enjoy some modicum of this success I enjoy here.
Well, I certainly wish you the best in, preparing for this interview. You happen to mention something about like a special project in the works. Like, what exactly are the details there? Certainly you don't want to give away all of your secrets, but what are some of your preparations for going into Worlds?
I'm on to you. You're trying to get all my secrets for everyone else.
I'll edit this part out.
So I'm currently starting to play test Tyranids. I don't play on OCTGN as much as I'd like, especially seeing as until recently I was in complete nationals preparation, which we were certain would not include the Great Devourer.
Right.
Now I have to start playtesting NIDs, learning what they can and can't do, learning whether they're viable at a competitive level. But the special projects that I'm looking at the moment is I'm looking at trying to rebuild Aldorath so that Aldorath doesn't struggle as much against Kith as he traditionally has. I'm looking at the cards from the Great Devourer, most specifically Autarch and Subdual, and how they affect his current game state, current deck shape, and how they play against the meta decks, what I need to hit, what I don't need to hit, whether they're worth playing. As I found out across the course of the last week, the Autarch is very expensive in an already expensive deck.
It most definitely is. I've seen it used to staggeringly good effect, but it definitely requires immense resource expenditure.
Yeah, you're already playing a very high resource curve with Eldorath Starbane, Starbane's Council being a 3-drop, playing your Wild Riders, which is a 4-drop.
Right.
Most of the time, unless you need the AoE, the Wild Riders are actually a better card for what you want to do. They mobile without cost, they have the extra hit point, and you don't really need the Armor Bane so much because you swing for such large numbers with Eldorath already. Subdual, I cannot praise enough, though.
Really?
Subdual, for me, is a big tempo play. It bounces back to the top of the deck, which some people have a problem with. It's not destroyed, it just goes back. But that means that you still don't neg a card compared to your opponent, because they redraw that card. So it's a card from their deck that you know what it is. So it's also hand knowledge. And hand knowledge is important, but just as much, the amount of crucial key pieces that you can hit with Subdual is amazing. Just off the top of my head, there's the Kugath's Plague Banner, Kato's Sword, the Orbital City, Ornshi's Sanctum, there's Chimera Den, Mark of Chaos, Alatok Shrine, Kato's Stronghold, Catachan Outpost. Most of these you won't even cop a resource cost compared to your opponent.
Right.
And removing them going into a big fight So removing a Chimera Den before your opponent can move all their Chimeras to the big fight is massive because they will have played around having it.
Well, it definitely is, and it's nice to hear, some strong play out of a card like that, where at least the online perception of it was pretty lukewarm at first. So I've definitely been personally surprised by just how effective a fair few different cards actually are when they're sitting on the tabletop as opposed to in theory. Like you mentioned, Autarch Salakia, I was blown away about just how many resources a player would have to invest in that unit, but I've witnessed it in a few different games used to just incredible effect, where it does, area effect to destroy a bunch of enemies, then it mobiles away to save itself, and then it armor banes to destroy something. So I just think, like you've been saying, practice is of the utmost importance, and really playtesting all of these cards, not just relying on theory, is going to make a hell of a lot of difference for you. And just by the merit of avoiding different cards, if you think that they aren't very good, if you happen to be in a competitive context and an opponent plays those on you, if they completely blindside you and you don't have any experience for how to play against them, then it's just going to decrease the likelihood of your ultimately winning.
Yes, well, I feel that Subdual probably should have been a one cost. It's a bit expensive at two, but even at one, it might have been too good. The Autarch itself is very, very expensive. It does win you games, especially in the matchups where Eldrath needs to win games, but
Sure.
the expense is huge. It's a 5 cost investment just to play it. So 4 plus the 1 for the ability. And even then you can completely lose it. The other downside to the Autarch is that to get its effectiveness out of it, because it's only got 1 command hammer despite its 4 cost.
Right.
You need to play it upstream. You don't have space for both that and the Spirit Seer. So it means you need to put your combat unit upstream, and all of a sudden Eldrath's once again your only real nullify target.
Yeah, I just think it's of the paramount importance that players actually experience some of these cards for themselves, as opposed to just outright avoiding them based on principle or popular opinion. Just because if it were things like that, we'd never see Nozdreg show up at the Australian Championships, and nobody would play Strachan or Shadow Sun. So I just think it's great to experiment.
I fully agree. I think everyone needs to play test all the cards for themselves, and if you have a varying opinion to any card that I've suggested, feel free to hit me up anytime to discuss them, preferably after you've play tested them yourselves. But you will be very surprised at a card's lack of power or actual power once you actually play it in a game format instead of just looking at the price on the card. An example for me is playtesting again for the Great Devourer was Vengeance. At a 1 cost and unit destruction to standard card, I felt that it wasn't a very good card. One of my meta friends tested it against me and used it to stand a Librarian with Stormbolter.
Wow.
Some of those combinations are massive. Like, that won him the game. Absolutely destroyed me.
Right.
And some of those combinations you just don't think of until you're playing the game yourself and realize just how potent a card is. Sometimes they're overcosted, but a lot of the time when they're overcosted, it's because if they were priced slightly cheaper, they would be too good.
Right. I mean, it just in a game where, say, the most expensive card we've seen costs something like 8 resources, the difference between, say, 1 and 2 resources when you're only getting a set income each and every round, plus whatever you earn during the command phase, it can make just an absolutely huge difference. And I've said time and time again, it seems like it must be an absolute nightmare to balance Conquest, but it just seems like such tiny differences could make a really big deal. Like if Klavek's War Leader cost 5 instead of 4, I wonder if it would be anything close to as regarded as just an incredible power card as it currently is.
To be honest, as a player, I would love for them to errata or change Clavex Leader. I think the card is too good. Much like Chimera Den, I think the card is too potent for what it does, and it completely removes certain elements of the card pool from the game for as long as it's seeing play.
Sure.
Big units, like you were talking about the 8 cost, which is the Ultramarines Dreadnought or the Helldrake. The big units taking that small amount of damage, then getting Clavexed, you can't play them. They're not viable in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
And so errataing a Clavex to either do damage or not be able to remove elites, something like that, brings that entire card pool into playability even now.
Right.
Without them adding the elite support that they're suggesting they're adding.
Sure. I mean, as much as errata is a little bit of a pain in the ass, having cards that do something other than what's printed upon them, I think for the sake of just maintaining fairness and as competitive a game as possible, limiting one-sidedness and just getting rid of power cards, I'm totally okay with our developers, taking an eraser to some of these cards and giving them a little bit of a makeover. But of course, it would be nice if they included in some future product like a printed copy of those cards. But
I prefer that they don't errata either, but the other option for them is to, and Fantasy Flight is actually very good at doing it, is to use their version of their restricted list
right.
to manage the combinations of Clavex. So Clavex itself is a very powerful effect, but it's the Clavex plus the Chimera Den plus the Archon's Terror plus the units of planet that make Clavex so deadly.
Sure.
If they were to restrict, say, Clavex and Archon's Terror, and I'm not suggesting this is the combination they should use, just as an example. If they were to restrict Clavex and Archon's Terror, you can still run Clavex, but you can never follow it up with the Archon's Terror.
Right.
Or you can never use the Archon's Terror to get into Clavex territory. So the card itself becomes less potent naturally because you don't have the support around it.
Right. I mean, just like with that Vengeance that your friend played, it wouldn't have been half so effective if that Nocturne Ultima Stormbolter wouldn't have effectively allowed him something like 4 attacks instead of the conventional 2 it does. So it just seems
he actually got 6 because he had the Kato Stronghold as well.
Oh, well, there you go. Even more ridiculous. But I suppose in your personal preparations for Worlds, any other considerations bouncing around in your mind or any other specific preparations that you have planned to do?
So I'm also very much looking at Zarathur as a warlord. I think he's got a very strong game against a lot of popular warlords.
Sure.
Especially with the new unique Rograx Bloodhand. He's with Orc Cannons and Ammo Depots, Warp Storms, his game against Kith can be fantastic. It can fall down if you don't see the Ammo Depots or the Cannons. If you don't see one or the other, you can fall down pretty easily. But as a whole, his game against Kith is quite good. So as a general idea, I guess I'm just trying to find a deck that isn't Kith that I can take to Worlds.
Well, I applaud you for trying, most definitely, and I think Zarathur poses a particular menace against my dear beloved Tyranids, so if they end up being a giant menace in Australia or at the World Championship, I suppose he might end up joining the ranks of our other warlords among the top tier. After all, a lot of players, like you happen to mention the personally esteemed Kingsley earlier, he thinks Zarathur is just right on the edge of tier 1, so if the Tyranids being introduced to the worldwide metagame happens to make a big impact, it seems like Old One Eye and the Swarmlord are both pretty powerful. then maybe Zarather will end up having his time to shine. I suppose any other just preparations for like the World Tournament? Do you intend to play the game between now and then, or are you going to take like a couple months long hiatus?
Oh, well, no, I'm clearly on hiatus. I have no intentions to actually compete at Worlds. I'm just using them for a free holiday.
Sure, just go in blind. You'll do fine.
No, I've got a lot of playtesting planned out. I'm already hounding my local meta for games all the time, assuming they'll allow me to proxy Great Devourer cards. Obviously, not anywhere yet, but Australia will probably take a couple of weeks longer than the rest of the world to get it.
Right.
I'm assuming that Great Devourer will be Worlds legal, seeing as it has moved to shipping. It suggests that we'll see it by October, and with a month to play it, I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be Worlds legal.
Sure.
Some people are suggesting that the first pack of Planetfall might be out by then, but I think it's to Fantasy Flight's detriment if they allow a pack that's been out for a week or two to be played at their World Tournament. It doesn't allow us competing enough time to playtest.
Right.
And thus we won't have the decks and the level of play that they want at their World level tournament.
Right. It definitely seems like it would kind of deter the ultra-competitive, ultra-refined deck environment that you would assume they would strive to maintain.
Well, the new Warlords won't have enough time to be tested, and thus and even the new cards, people won't know their deck shapes yet.
Right.
They won't know what goes in, what comes out. And there always is someone that will turn up with the brand new stuff and just have a bit of fun.
Sure.
And you can completely lose games to that, not knowing how the deck works.
Right. I mean, personally, I'd like to see players lose because of skill discrepancy as opposed to surprise.
Yeah, as a player, I genuinely don't mind if I lose to a better player. I'm quite happy if someone's done more preparation than me, or is simply a better player than I am, and there's many out there that are simply a better player than I am. They beat me. They were better. Losing to surprise, losing to something that I just simply haven't had enough time to learn at a world level tournament.
Right. It's
disheartening, and it's almost a kick in the teeth against the game.
Well, I definitely completely agree with you. I suppose just as our interview winds ever slowly down, anything else that you'd like to just suggest for players trying to become more competitive or become more formidable in a, ultra refined tournament type environment?
So the big suggestion that I have is that players learn all the Warlords. You will always favor a couple of Warlords, whether it's due to aesthetic, play style, or you just think they're cool. But you need to play and learn all Warlords. You'll learn how they match up not only against your favorite Warlords, but against others. So then you'll learn how a meta defines. And you'll also learn what trends and tech you can manipulate for your favorite Warlords and for them as an anti-meta call. Every game has a point where, currently for us, it's Eldorath. Preferred Warlords are likely to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Eldorath against Kith struggles a lot. And playing other Warlords, knowing other Warlords means that you don't have to jump from your preferred Warlord to another one, lose a bunch of games and drift out of the game because you're not having fun because you're losing it all.
Right.
You'll also very quickly learn the curves, the costs, and common plays from the other decks much better than you would just playing against them, so you know what to look out for. An example, again, using the same one, Siren plus Planum. If I hadn't played Kith, I'd never be able to look out for that. It's a complete out-of-nowhere play for the most part, unless you know it's there. But knowing it's there, you can play around it and commit where you need to commit. Apart from that, build a community around yourself. it's good for the game as a whole. It gets lots of people into it. But if you have players to enjoy the game with, the pressure comes off a lot and you can improve your gameplay without stressing about poor choices because you can just have a bit of a laugh. If you're playing at home, you can have a few beers. Yes, I advocate alcohol. I'm Australian. I have to do it. Sorry. So build a community around yourself if possible. If you have some players to enjoy the game with, the pressure comes off a lot and you can just improve your gameplay without stressing about poor choices, have a few laughs and just get on with it. You'll also have players that you know where they stand against you, and thus you'll have people either constantly nipping at your heels if you're the best player in your local meta, or you'll have someone to strive to beat. Without a community, it's really hard to get games. I'm really appreciative of the Octagon software, but I don't think it compares to playing a real game on a table. And obviously, I'm sure you know a lot about this, not having a local meta yourself.
Right. I was going to say, speaking of trying to create a community, I've certainly tried to foster a bit of an online one for myself, but now that I've just recently moved to a new, very college student inclusive town, hopefully I'll be able to scrounge up some local players and create a bit of a local meta, probably focused around myself. I'll have to think of a cute name to give them all, like my Termagant tokens or something like that, but it should be great actually getting a chance to play the game in real life with other human beings, just because I'm filled with so much envy each and every time I hear someone talk about playing with the actual cards or, watch another video online. So
it's a much better experience. Octagon can seem very impersonal because, especially when you're constantly typing any action, your action, playing it against an opponent, you can just say, okay, just stop me if you actually have an action, and they're much more willing to go along with it.
Right.
But just as much, you get the laughs, you get the, well, hopefully not the tears, but the sense of enjoyment about playing a game with people that, if they're not already, will become close friends.
Sure, it's the whole camaraderie thing and, that fun focus that we touched on earlier. So
it's also really good to have the local community for competitive play. It's someone to travel with. If you can build a good community, even just a good core community, you've got someone to travel with to big events, but also someone to commiserate with or enjoy your success.
Sure.
If you manage to have some success.
Right. And I mean, I can't help but think of having like a gym partner or something like that. Like if you've got a big tournament coming up and you're just maybe feeling anxious about it or nervous and you should practice, but you just don't feel like it. If you've got somebody else to encourage you to get out there and do what you should be doing or would really like to be doing, it just is yet another little factor working in your favor. If you've got a community to help build you up and support you and encourage you and, pat you on the bottom and tell you everything is going to be okay, then that's just fantastic.
I actually do really like the gym partner example, because that's how my prep happens. I have a strong local community, but especially one player that I play with every week, and knowing, even if I don't feel like it, I know he's going to be there on the night we play games every week, and thus I turn up and I play games anyway, because there was a point semi-recently where I was feeling quite disheartened about the game. I didn't like where the competitive state was. I didn't like some of the random things that could happen in the game.
Right.
I still don't like Kith. I just immensely dislike Choke as a play style. I don't think it's fun for any player. And it's unlike Control, where Control is saying, I'm going to stop you from doing certain parts. Choke is saying, you can't play the game. And I don't think that's fun to play with or against.
Sure.
But knowing that he was there, I was able to keep turning up and keep practicing despite being disheartened. And the practice paid off.
Well, I'll say so. I suppose before we do ultimately close out our video today, any closing thoughts, any final words of wisdom or nuggets of advice or encouragement you have for players, for listeners out there?
Be ready to surprise yourself. You're quite likely a much better player than you give yourself credit for. If you give yourself a chance, you'll enjoy a lot more success that way. We're always our worst judges. We always think the worst of ourselves. We always punish ourselves the worst. If you stop doing that, or try to stop doing that, because it's a lot harder than it sounds, and keep playing, you'll do really well. But just have fun with the game. It's a hobby. You're not going to work. You're not doing your 9 to 5. It's your relaxing time. If you can't enjoy it, then take a few steps back, wind down, and get back to the core of the game, which is playing cards against people you like.
Well, I could have sworn I asked you to direct this to the viewers, not personally to me, but it certainly speaks volumes, and I can very much identify with what you say. So, in playing the game and in creating this channel, all too often I kind of lose sight of what a game should really be about. So, thank you so much for your time tonight. I think the interview turned out extraordinarily well, and unless you have anything else to toss out there, I'll just say thank you once again for your time, and have an incredible evening.
Just before I go, I would like to once again reiterate that playtest your cards and don't accept everyone's word on what's good and what's not. There's certain cards that do alter the game set of a game massively. Archon's Palace, something that no one disagrees with, is an amazing card.
Right.
But there's always going to be cards like that come up that people are going to dismiss and then later cotton on to. If you're the one that picks it out first, you can quite often enjoy a lot of success just by being the first one onto it. So really do play test, practice, and just enjoy yourselves. And that's all from me in Australia. Hopefully my kangaroo's still waiting.
I was going to ask if it was the marsupials that made all the difference in your local metagame, but thank you for
when we let the koalas play, that was a problem. They kept eating the cards. It was expensive.
Those adorable bastards. But thank you very much, Brendon, and have a great evening. Well, with our interview having drawn to a close, I'll just conclude this video by saying thank you once again for watching, and I very much hope you enjoyed this special discussion. Please leave a comment sharing your own thoughts and opinion regarding not just this interview and Brendon's advice, but also your own personal experiences when it comes to tournament or competitive play. Interaction with viewers like you is sincerely the absolute highlight of my continuing to create and maintain content for this channel, and I'm honored to have had the opportunity to share with you this interview today. So, with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already. Or, if you are already subscribed, you're encouraged to share this content, as the more eyes there are on these videos, the more potential new players we might draw to this game, and as a result, serve only to ever expand our Conquest community. Please feel free to contact me directly or keep in touch through Twitter or Facebook, and as ever, I'd be utterly honored were you to contribute to my Patreon. But in any case, thank you once again for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.